Thank you once again for joining us in our studies in the Gospel of Mark. In our last study we were looking together at Jesus' famous story or parable of the sower. Today we're considering three further parables where the same question that prompted the earlier story is being answered by Jesus. The question is, of course, what is the kingdom of God like? So let's hear together what Mark reports. He tells us, Jesus said to them, "Do you bring in a lamp to put it under a bowl or a bed? Instead, don't you put it on its stand? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. If anyone has ears to hear, let them hear." "Consider carefully what you hear," he continued. "With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and even more. Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them." He also said, "This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground. Night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself the soil produces grain, first the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. As soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it, because the harvest has come." Again he said, "What shall we say the kingdom of God is like, or what parable shall we use to describe it? It's like a mustard seed, which is the smallest of all seeds on earth, yet when planted, it grows and becomes the largest of all the garden plants, with such big branches that the birds can perch in its shade." With many similar parables, Jesus spoke the word to them, as much as they could understand. He did not say anything to them without using a parable, but when he was alone with his disciples, he explained everything. Now, in our last study, we noted that both those who are considering the claims of the Christian faith and those who are already Christian believers are often puzzled when Jesus' claims to be a king, indeed the King of Kings, seem not to be backed up with any evidence. In the parable of the sower, we saw that Jesus' reply is that perhaps above all his rule begins and is to be seen as individual women and men open their hearts to him and his message. It is their lives, then, that are a testimony to his rule, and thus there are billions of testimonies over 2 millennia that reveal his kingdom is at work in them. However, that cannot be the full answer. We live in a highly ambiguous world, where often what might be called the forces of darkness seem everywhere, and to be winning victory after victory. Those dark forces seem to be present when nations rise up against other nations, where societies seem irrevocably and often violently divided by race, religion, colour, education and status. Even as individuals, we can be all too well aware of the dark forces that seem at work within us, creating disharmony in our relationships and even deep disorder and harmful addictions at the very centre of our being. So where is Jesus' rule to be seen? Such a question seems to lie behind these three parables that Jesus taught, and each of them make a slightly different point. I would then first of all like to consider the second of Jesus' short parables, and can I remind you what Jesus said, and I quote, "This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground night and day. Whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself the soil produces grain, first the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. As soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it, because the harvest has come." Once again, we're not surprised by Jesus using an agricultural illustration. He was, after all, living in an agricultural community. Again, he refers to a sower, but here his interest is not in the different types of soil, as it is in the process of germination, growth, and harvesting. Again, implicit in the story is that Jesus himself is the sower, and his point is that while it may be hidden, he is already at work as his message is received by those who hear it. But we notice that the main point of this parable seems to lie in the words all by itself. The word that Mark uses here is the Greek word automate, from which we get automatic. So Jesus is describing a process that is inevitable. He sows, his message germinates, and it produces a fruitful harvest. When Jesus uttered these words, he was only surrounded by a small company of mostly confused followers. However, the most nodding acquaintance with both church history and the present growth of the Christian church worldwide bears eloquent testimony to the truth of Jesus' words. Billions upon billions of Christians for 2,000 years, including some of us undertaking these very studies, have encountered Jesus and his teaching and become living evidence of this inevitable growth of Jesus' reign in and through them. Despite the obstacles that have been placed in the way of the Christian faith, it has triumphed and continued to grow century after century. And it does so still now. All of which leads us to the third of the parables Jesus taught here. Again, let's remind one another of what he said. What shall we say the kingdom of God is like? Or what parable shall we use to describe it? It's like a mustard seed, which is the smallest of all seeds on earth. Yet, when planted, it grows and becomes the largest of all garden plants, with such big branches that the birds can perch in its shade. Jesus' point here is reasonably obvious, that the time will come when his rule simply cannot be denied. The rule of Jesus will one day be seen in a worldwide and awesome kingdom. There are, however, two significant points in this parable that I would like to address with you. First of all, there is a reference to the birds of the air. In the writings of two Old Testament authors, Daniel and Ezekiel, and you might want to see Daniel 4:12, Ezekiel 17:23, and again Ezekiel 31 verse 6, in these writings the phrase is used of those people who were not Jews. Jesus may then be claiming that his kingdom will include Jews, like him and those around him, but also everyone else. It will be universal. It may be hidden at the moment, but his kingdom will grow unto the point where it is visible and universal. The time will come then when no one will be able to ask the question, where is the kingdom? The other thing to notice is that Jesus makes a contrast between the smallness of the seed and the size of the plant. The mustard seed was proverbial in ancient Palestine for its smallness among herb seeds, and even today travellers in the Holy Land report mustard bushes growing up to 4 or 5 meters in height and offering shelter from the winter storms for flocks of birds. So Jesus' answer to the question of where the evidence is to be found for his rule lies in the universal growth of the Christian movement, which he spoke about but we can now see, and what we cannot now see, the fact that this will eventually lead to his unquestionable and universal rule. But we need to return to the first of Jesus' stories here. Let me quote from what Mark says. Jesus said to them, "Do you bring a lamp to put it under a bowl or a bed? Instead, don't you put it on its stand? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. If anyone has ears to hear, let them hear. And consider carefully what you hear," he continued. "With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and even more. Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them." This parable and Jesus' comments are more difficult to unravel than the two stories we've considered so far. It's not clear, for example, what is the point of the comparison that Jesus makes. However, in the light of the warning to be watchful that accompanies the parable itself, it would appear that Jesus intends to indicate that there are things that are hidden which will not always be so, and can be glimpsed by the thoughtful mind and the open heart. So Jesus' kingdom may seem somewhat mysteriously hidden, but this is not and will not always be the case. As we've seen in our study so far, his rule is not without evidence even now. Meanwhile, we all need to carefully listen and watch and be ready to respond to his challenge, even though we do not presently see all that we might expect or are looking for. Where then is the evidence that Jesus is our universal King and our God? Well, says Jesus, listen to me. Come meet me. Look around at all the citizens of my kingdom. Yes, there is much that is hidden. But what you can see if your hearts are willing and your minds are open is merely the evidence that the seed has germinated. Growth is taking place. Growth that points inevitably to my worldwide kingdom to come. And so, to quote from Jesus' own words, are we ready to listen to him?